You should be doing that in the real world.
Your life should be the adventure, not. Welcome to episode 5. Today we're going to be detailing something called the mirror neuron system. It's going to span off quite well from last episode, which we talked about the prefrontal cortex. But I guess this is going to take it a step further and kind of highlight how not only what we do, but the things we observe, how they affect us, and also how they influence our habits. And then we'll talk about social media and also environment and the people around us.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the mirror neuron system is a relational system, if you want to put it that way. Essentially, what occurs when you're, I suppose, hanging out with another person, you're both engaging in behaviours. Simple as drinking from a drink bottle. When I see you pick up the drink bottle and go to take a drink from it, essentially there's a part of my brain that is firing. And it's actually an understanding neural circuitry that allows me to understand what your behavior is. And essentially I can infer motivation from that. So yeah, that simple example of picking up the water bottle, because we all know what that is, you're going to get that mirror neuron firing. And there are lots of implications for this system, learning, etc., which we will get into a little bit. But yeah. I suppose at its most core level, it's understanding other people's behaviours.
But are these mirror neurons also firing the same way when you do something and observe the same behaviour? Well,
interestingly, that you actually have to have engaged in that behavior before for you to actually understand it in someone else. So if I go and do something foreign, for example, to me, say I've never played football and I observe someone playing football, it's going to be completely new and I'm not actually going to get any mirror neuron firing. So at that point, no, I'm not going to have the same level of activation in the brain. It's not until you have a base level understanding of the behavior, I suppose.
But once you have that understanding of any behaviour, these mirror neurons do fire up in the same way when you do the behaviour and also when you observe it. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Right, yeah, because I think that's a key point to understand, I guess, for the audience as well.
Yeah.
These fire up just when you're observing a behaviour, the same way they would if you were to do the behaviour. And I guess implications for that is what is important, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the reason we sort of picked this as a follow-on from last episode was because it gives you that understanding of, well, what happens when I surround myself with a bunch of people engaging in the same behavior? And answer this question for me, like, is it more likely that I'm going to engage in that behavior, or am I just going to stay how I am now? Like, what actually occurs? Like,
well, I guess what this mirror neuron system tells us is if you were to hang around 4 people who constantly smoke, just purely by observing them do that, you're now more susceptible to doing that down the track. So you don't even need to smoke. You don't even need to be a smoker. If you've smoked in the past or observed smoking in the past, you're now going to be far more susceptible to that behaviour. And I think that's interesting because it's not just the things we do, it's the things we observe now. And if you're around that sort of environment, of course it's going to rub off on you.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest one is your family, obviously. Like, if your whole family's been engaging in a behaviour your whole life, the likelihood that you're actually going to eventually engage in that as well is pretty high. Like,
I would say it's almost certain.
Yeah.
Like, and I guess the thing with your family and when you're young, you don't actually know whether these behaviours are positive or negative. You know, the people in your family or the people around you growing up could be, you know, alcoholics, could be smokers, and when you're observing these things at a young age, you don't know. You don't know whether this is positive or negative, but you are going to pick these things up as you grow up, and these mirror neurons will fire in the same way as if you were picking up a bottle of a beer or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it does sort of contradict what I said earlier about not understanding what the behaviour is at the start. You're not going to get that mirror neuron firing, but just being creative and just human, being around a bunch of people drinking alcohol, you're obviously seeing them enjoy that experience. You can infer what it's like purely from observation. And I suppose that gets into associative learning and stuff like that. But yeah,
you're right in the sense that I guess from a very young age you don't actually know. It's very foreign to you. But if you observe this for 15 years straight, then that associative learning comes in, and you're inferring all these things.
And like, what's interesting is your brain is so, I suppose, plastic as well. Like, you're always trying to associate things with each other. So say you've grown up and your family all drink alcohol. Well, now you've grown up, you might associate alcohol with bonding with a friend, or bonding with your family, or dinner time, or watching TV after work. All of a sudden, you've associated all of these things that aren't actually connected in nature, but because you've been, I suppose, exposed to it over a long period, your brain has actually made those connections. And I suppose it's really hard to talk about this because you obviously don't choose your family and you don't choose the behaviors they engage in day to day, but it does have implications. Like, if you come from a broken home, a dysfunctional home, like, you're going to have things you're going to have to deal with throughout your life. And I think this is spanning, I suppose, a little bit past just the basic concept of mirror neurons, but this is where consciousness of yourself and your circumstances come into play, I would say.
Yeah, but I guess once you've inherited these habits or ideas about the world, how do you then change them, 20 years down the track? Because I guess your biology is working against you at this point, because in your brain you got all these things cemented, whether it is, we talk about alcohol all the time, but it's not just about alcohol, it's any habit or any behaviour. How do you then change them down the track?
I suppose I always like to use examples of drug addicts because they're the most extreme example of these behaviours. And I think you can infer a lot from looking at extreme examples, but there's, I suppose, the cliche of the person that's gone through remission and they're no longer using a substance, say. A lot of the times they can't even be around it. Yeah. You know what I mean? An alcoholic who's struggled for 10, 15 years and has stopped can't go to the pub and just have dinner with his mates. Yeah. You know what I mean? He can't be around people engaging in that behavior because it's so ingrained in his habits and in the neural connections in his brain. So I suppose to answer your question, you essentially have to cut either people out of your life or just the situations you choose to expose yourself to. And that's a difficult conversation to have because we were talking a little bit before this episode about, and maybe this is a question you can answer after, but if someone's bad for you, how do you go about, either helping them change their behaviors or cutting them off if you have to? Is that even a solution? If you have a close friend that is still an alcoholic and I've recovered, can I still see that person? I suppose that's my question to you.
Is what you're saying, though, before I answer that question, is what you're saying you got to pretty much go cold turkey and cut these things out completely if you've been so accustomed to them for so long? Well,
yes, because your brain has created such profound connections that obviously don't fade. They're always there. What we stipulated in another episode was that once you've made connections, they never go away. You just create connections on top of that. Yeah. And through stress, you actually revert back to the original connection. But to answer your question, yes, you have to go cold turkey.
Simple answer, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, to answer your question, say you're a recovering alcoholic and you've now recovered and you got mates that are still alcoholics. I would say if you were not to cut these people out of your life, you'd unequivocally resort back to alcohol at some point. It would just take, one stressful situation in your life or something tragic happening, and before you know it, you're with the same people drinking. So the mirror neuron system, I think we've spanned off a little bit here, but the mirror neuron system and your environment, I think, are the two things to take out of this. Because just observing, this alcoholic doesn't need to be drinking with his mates, but just observing them drink is going to make him so much more susceptible to drinking down the track. And then he's relapsed, and before you know it,
I mean, it's so powerful because, like, obviously your everyday person knows that, if I'm surrounded by something, I'm going to be likely to engage in it as well. They know that is a fact. I suppose the mirror neuron system is a great way just to explain it, don't you think? Like,
yeah, exactly right.
Having that understanding actually might give you the tools to actually escape a negative situation.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I don't think this is any sort of rocket science. Yeah. The majority of people know if you hang around negative people, you'll be negative. But this system details the why, and the why is predominantly through that observation. And it is important to kind of know this. I don't think everybody needs to be, accustomed deep into the science, but to know why you're picking up these behaviours, I would say, is important. Yeah. And I guess that's what you're saying here as well.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to ask you that, I suppose, question about, well, say I exhibit lots of negative behaviours, right? Like I'm drinking, I'm smoking, I'm partying, etc. And you're exhibiting a lot of positive behaviours. You're looking after your health, you're running, gymming.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to achieve your goals. Like, what's more powerful, your effect on me or my effect on you, positively or negatively?
It's a fair question. Like, are you going to rub more on me than I'm going to rub on you?
Yeah.
I guess.
Like, I feel like even just an opinion, like it doesn't have to be a scientific explanation, but.
I think we'd both rub off each other, but.
Would we become the average?
Yeah, like, is it true there'd be some sort of equilibrium where we're the average of each other, or because you're negative, are you going to rub off more on me than I'm going to rub off on you? Because I don't think it's true that necessarily the negative's more powerful. I think this mirror neuron system also, these positive influences will also rub off on you if you observe them. I would just say there's probably more negative influences out there in today's world anyway, and because of that, that's what's rubbing off on the majority of people.
Yeah, do you think there's more negative going around?
Of course, yeah, of course. I think.
What makes you think that?
I mean, the majority of people that even we know, or I guess the culture, in Australia where we live is a heavy drinking culture, a heavy drug culture, maybe not smoking, but there's a lot of negative influences, probably more than positive, I would say.
Do you think social media is perpetuating that, or?
I think it's interesting to tie social media into it because when you jump on your phone, you can pretty well observe anything. There's no bounds to what you can look at on your phone. And this mirror neuron system is essentially telling us what we observe, we're going to, habitually pick up over time. So if you're constantly logging onto your phone and looking at TikToks of, I don't know, just mundane things in general or porn, these things are going to, over time, make you far more susceptible to doing them.
I mean, that's interesting. And I was thinking the other day, like, when I scroll through Instagram, right, and just through my friends' stories and stuff like that, a lot of what is shown is, of course, there's good stuff, but there's a lot of just like, well, what did I do on the weekend? Yeah. I went out and I drank and I had a good time at a festival or at a concert or something like that, which isn't inherently bad, but it does paint a very singular picture. And through observing that one singular, I suppose, behaviour that everyone seems to be engaging in, which in reality they're not, but they're painting the picture online, and that's what I'm viewing. So ultimately, is my focus not going to be on that? You know what I mean? Like, am I not going to be looking forward to my weekend and thinking, well, I want to engage in that as well, because everyone else seems to be doing it? Like,
you're ultimately correct. And I would be in agreement with what you just said. It's very hard to look at something over and over again and not be, persuaded by it. And I guess with our generation in particular, we have a real addiction to our phones or social media. How do you break that? because, this mirror neuron system is telling us just purely by observing anything, it's going to affect us. Well, so what do you do? My question is, what do you do?
Well, I'm going to go completely opinionated here.
Yeah. Go on.
I think you need to realize that what is actually being displayed on social media is like 0.1% of people's lives. Like, when you go online, just think about it. Are you going to be posting the mundane, boring 99% of what you do? Or are you going to be posting that 0.1% that either you find really interesting or you think other people are going to find really interesting? Like, our liking behaviors online reflect what we value.
Yeah.
And value can be positive and negative as well. Like, if I value high dopamine release behaviors, I'm going to be liking photos of people engaging in behaviors that ultimately would release really high dopamine in myself. Like, so my answer to that question is realize that social media is not a accurate depiction of reality, to be honest.
Yeah, no one's sitting there posting, videos of them just working in a room, because no one wants to see that ultimately.
Yeah.
It's, the 1% of activities in their life that they think other people are going to not even be interested in, but be, I guess, reacting to and drawn by.
And it's something that's actually been sort of difficult for even me to overcome, like realizing that no one's life is that perfect. No one's life is that fun. Like, and as soon as you realize that, it actually frees you up to go, hey, I'm okay with just going through the boring shit when I have to. You know what I mean? Like, realizing that no one's a success overnight as well. Like, there's plenty of stories, because I'm interested in music and stuff like that, plenty of stories of people blowing up overnight, when in reality, it was a 10-year process of them grinding for them to get to that point where their single blew up and now they're on the hottest 100. Like, it's hard because there are positives to social media, and I don't want to just sit here and bash it, but there is a lot of delusion on there.
I guess people only see the outcome. And how dangerous do you think that is?
I think it is quite dangerous. And to tie it back to the mirror neuron system, that system can't differentiate between fact and fiction, I suppose, if you want to put it that way. Like, if you're believing something's real, your brain is going to respond in a way that believes it's real as well. So if you think that you should be a millionaire by 21 and it's so easy to do it and all these people online are doing it, but it's not happening to you, well, what's going to happen to your health, like your mental health at that point? You're going to go through the fucking floor because you're thinking, I'm just this loser that can't do anything. And like, I'm being sort of, I don't know, ridiculous, but it can be extrapolated into many different contexts as well. Like, it doesn't have to be purely making money or being successful. It could be beauty. Like, and I think women are susceptible to this as well. Like, there's obviously a depiction of the ideal woman in today's society is obviously has the certain figure, like has the looks, the lips, the hair or whatever. When in reality, a lot of these Instagram models are just editing their photos. They don't even look like that in real life. And if you're sitting there believing people actually look like that, what's that going to do to your self-image?
Yeah, it's going to have a real effect on you, especially mentally. And you've talked about extremes there, but the point to note is this is any behaviour, positive or negative, you can take from social media. But I guess we're talking about social media and we're banging on about this because it is, I guess, a big part of today's culture and society. People are very readily on their phones all the time. You know, if you walk into a coffee shop or a restaurant, you'd look around and almost everyone's on their phone. And when you sit down, what are you going to do?
You're going to be on your phone.
Of course. Also because you're observing everyone else doing this behaviour, you're now doing it.
It's only natural.
Yeah, but if you walked into a coffee shop and not a single person's on their phone, you can't even see a phone in sight, you're going to be far less inclined to sit down and go straight on your phone. And then that is a tool that would help you, I guess, try and stop this addiction with social media.
Yeah.
Because everybody's addicted, I believe, to social media because everybody around them is. If you go to any social gathering, what's everyone doing? They're on their phones, they're taking videos, and you're sitting there. You're not going to be the only person sitting there just with your phone out, just looking around.
You'd be odd.
Yeah, like
odd.
it would be a bit strange. So, but if you were to rock up, I don't know, to any social gathering and not a single person's on their phone, you're far less inclined to do it then.
Well, I suppose to ask you, like you said, you'd look odd if you weren't engaging in that behaviour. Well, how do you want to have a social life and you want to have connection with people? How do you change behaviour and also still fit in? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what's the solution there?
Yeah, we're talking a lot about negative habits, alcohol, social media, and I think it's too simplistic to just say to people, cut everything out of your life and just sit in a room by yourself and do nothing. Like, that's not a practical answer. If someone was to come to me or you and say, hey, I'm struggling with my addiction, whatever it is, alcohol, drugs, Instagram, I think it's too simplistic to just say to that person, don't do it again, right? Because you need social interaction. You need to talk to people. You need to be social. You need to go out with people. But I guess if the people you're around are constantly going out and doing things that you don't want to be doing or don't agree with, you do have to cut these people off. Like it's really as simple as that.
That's a tough call to make, though.
It's a tough call to make because I guess people have this association in their head. If I've known someone for 20 years, I got to know them for the next 20. But just because you've been friends with someone forever doesn't mean they're the right person for you ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking a little bit before this, like, if someone isn't willing to grow and adapt with you, like you said, they're just not the right person. Like, a relationship takes the communication between two people and to come to some common ground. Like, if I'm constantly lowering myself for this other person, is that a fair relationship?
It's not a fair trade-off. Like, it's just not,
No. So like you said, you're not a bad guy if you choose, oh, I'm sorry, like I can't see you anymore. Like, you're just not living up to the expectation of a relationship. Like,
yeah, that person's just not for you.
Yeah.
It's not about being a good or bad person. You could be a way worse person than the person you're cutting off, but they're just not living a lifestyle that you want to live. And that's okay. Everybody ultimately has different lives, and some people do like to go out all the time and have a good time, and that's okay, but it's just not for you. And in that case, you probably need to say, it's nice knowing you, all the best.
Yeah, I mean, I think social media is a great example, but I think there's also other implications for this system. I suppose when you look at something like Netflix and how that, I suppose, has grown in just such popularity over the last few years, like binge watching series is quite a common thing for people to do nowadays. Like, I'd say majority of people watch quite a bit of movies and TV shows, etc. And I sort of had this thought a little while ago about, well, why is it that we're so, I suppose, even addicted to watching these sort of medias? And I think what I actually came to, and I want to hear your thoughts on this as well, is that you are crying out, yourself is crying out for a certain level of adventure and a certain level of actual, I suppose, action in the world. The things you're seeing on these TV shows are actually just representations of the things that you could be doing. That's why it's actually so rewarding to watch these shows. And what I came to think was, like, why am I subjugating myself to a subpar experience when I could actually be going out and doing these things that actually is, like, attractive to me? Like when I watch a TV show and the heroes overcome some obstacle, like, you feel good, you get dopamine, you're like, I identify with that person.
You live through that person.
But my point is that you should be doing that in the real world.
Your life should be the adventure, not on Netflix, not Game of Thrones. It should be your life, yeah.
Yeah, and when I thought that, like, it sort of did change a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I sort of just came to the realization, like, I can't be subjugating myself to this subpar experience, like I said.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
I agree with you. You could be living that experience in your own life, not viewing it, online.
Yeah.
But why is it someone like you, 23, 24-year-olds, come to the conclusion or have the consciousness to look at things like that and I guess cut a lot of certain things out of your life, because you have done that. Like, there's no two ways about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because
I guess before you answer it, like, you are just as exposed to any other sort of behaviour as anyone else. You know, everywhere you go into the workplace, you go out, you're constantly seeing people do things that, knowing you personally, you don't want to do. How do you limit your exposure to that and then I guess not engage in those things?
I suppose, to put it simply, I just wasn't satisfied being an observer, essentially. Like, I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a room watching people doing things that ultimately I value and wish I was doing myself. Like, it was a bigger sacrifice for me to sit here and continue to engage in the binge drinking or whatever it was than to actually just stop all of that, cut whoever I needed to cut off, and actually go ahead and start building myself so I could eventually be successful in the areas I wanted to be successful in. I'm not there yet, but I would prefer to have a massive crack right now than look back and think, man, I just wasted my time. Like,
no, you're very correct. And like, that is a difficult thing to do, because it's not like you can just cut this massive area of your life out or cut all these people out of your life and make this seamless transition into another group. Like, it does take time to find, I guess, valuable people that you align with. So when you do something like that, like, there is a period of isolation. Like, do you want to, I guess, get into that?
Yeah, I mean, of course. Like, and we talked about this, like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Being, like, connected with people is a huge part of it. It's more important than external validation and external achieving of goals. So it's like, you're making a huge sacrifice by doing this, especially if you can't make that seamless transition. So I suppose, like, I don't want to get overly personal, but, like, I would suggest having something in place for you to actually go into before doing this, because you're going to go through a world of shit if you just cut everything off. Like, the way I think about it is, antidepressants and stuff are used so commonly today. And things like binge eating, watching TV shows, actually works in the same way. You're getting this slow release of dopamine, but it's an unsatisfying release and it's unnatural. So I suppose when you cut all of that stuff off, it's like you're coming off antidepressants. And what happens when you come off antidepressants is that you go through a period of extreme negative emotion. And if you're going to, like, it's bad to say, but if you're going to kill yourself, that's when you're going to do it. So it's like, if you don't have the supports and in place, you're in trouble.
Yeah, no, you're ultimately correct. And I've interviewed you a little bit and put you on the spot, but the idea is, like, you've been exposed to observing all these negative behaviours just like anyone else. Like, these mirror neurons have been firing in your brain just like anyone else. But you've made that decision to go out and cut all these things out of your life, I guess, in your mind, for a greater purpose.
I mean, I suppose as well, just to point out, like, I have a degree in psychology, so I suppose I have been exposed to some of this stuff, and is why I feel like I have some authority to talk about it a little bit. It's not just, I'm not just, I suppose, sitting here talking personal experience and opinion, which is fine, but, like, I do have some level of grounding in this space. just to put that out there. But yeah, no, I did think it was a valuable change, 100%.
What about though that for other people? Like, why should they go on and do that? Because maybe the lifestyle you live also is not for everyone, but there's definitely habits or influences in people's life that they probably know they should cut off but are not.
I suppose nothing changes if nothing changes.
Strong quote.
It sums it up. Like, do you want to continue living like this, essentially? And what happens if you just accept things for how they are now? Like, life is a progression. And just because you want things to stay the same, or just because you're afraid of change, doesn't mean things are ultimately not going to change, because they are. It's just a function of life. It's a function of time. Like, you're going to age. You're going to look different in 20 years.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to have different values. You might have a family. Like, who are you thinking about at that point? Is it exclusively you? Like, or are you thinking of your kids, your wife, etc.?
Yeah.
Like, you need to take a load on, and you need to do it voluntarily. Like,
it goes back to kind of that like voluntary discomfort we talked about. We've talked about it previously on here.
Yeah.
Doing things purely because you don't want to do them. And this is, on a much lower scale, much the case here.
it's Sisyphus. It's the guy that's constantly carrying the boulder up the hill.
Who's that?
It's like a Greek.
That Greek mythology.
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
It's a representation of life. Like,
Yeah.
and the idea is that you're actually satisfied doing that as well. That's where you find purpose and meaning, and that's what Peterson talks about all the time.
Yeah.
You're not looking for happiness. You're looking for ultimately purpose and fulfillment. That's actually where you're going to get all of the positive feeling and the positive outcome. It's not in your instant gratification and your momentary happiness, because that is so fleeting.
Well, yeah, any sort of, I guess, fulfillment or purpose isn't going to be found in a comfortable environment. And we've talked about that, and everybody knows that, right? I think we've spanned off a little bit, and we've talked about a multitude of things, but what the mirror neuron system also does stipulate is you can also pick up emotions of the people around you purely by observing them. And that's kind of an important point. If you're constantly exposed to people who whinge and complain and get overly emotional, you're now going to be far more susceptible to these things down the track. And before you know it, you find yourself complaining about things you otherwise wouldn't.
So I suppose, are you saying that it's not just the physical behaviours you observe?
Yeah, correct.
It's actually the non-physical as well.
Correct, yeah. It's also the emotions, not just, you could look at someone, drinking alcohol. That's obviously a negative behaviour, you know that. But also the emotions people exhibit around you do rub off on you purely by observing them.
No, that's tough, because I suppose relating it to that thing of cutting people off, but you got to, I suppose, look at it as, if someone's not coming to the table and you're lowering yourself constantly, well, yeah, they're not the person for you, and it, I suppose, is the only way to go forward.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, to conclude, I guess, on the mirror neurons and the implications, the key takeaway for me is the things that are around you, or the people that are around you, influence you probably more than you may realise. So knowing that, you're probably going to be a lot more careful about the things you watch, the things you hear, and also the people that you surround yourself with.